Elon Musk stepped out of the sleek black Tesla, adjusting the hood of his jacket as a cold breeze swept through the Los Angeles streets. It was late, well past midnight, and the city had an eerie stillness. His mind was still buzzing with thoughts from the high-stakes meeting he had just left, but something pulled his attention away. Near the entrance of an underground subway station, a figure sat hunched against the cold concrete wall, wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket. It was not an unusual sight in this part of the city, but something about this particular man made Elon stop in his tracks. There was something familiar in the way he sat, in the shape of his face, in the way his hands, thin and trembling, gripped a cup of coffee that was long cold. Elon took a hesitant step closer, his heartbeat picking up. He should have kept walking. He should have ignored the nagging feeling in his gut, but he could not. The man shifted slightly, and the dim light from a nearby street lamp illuminated his face. For a split second, Elon felt like the ground had disappeared from beneath him. His breath caught in his throat. William? The name came out before he could even think, like muscle memory, a name that had not passed his lips in years. The man lifted his head, his hollow eyes locking onto Elon's. A long pause stretched between them, filled with the hum of distant traffic and the occasional murmur of late-night pedestrians passing by. William blinked, his expression unreadable at first. Then, recognition flickered in his tired eyes, followed by something else. Shame, disbelief. His lips parted slightly as if to say something, but no words came out. He just stared. Elon's mind reeled. This was not just any homeless man. This was William Parker, his childhood best friend, the boy who used to dream with him, who once stayed up all night talking about the future, about the impossible things they were going to accomplish, the smartest guy he had ever known. And now, here he was, sitting on the street, looking like a ghost of the person Elon remembered. 100 questions raced through Elon's mind, but he could not ask any of them, not yet. Instead, he just took another step forward. What happened to you? His voice was barely above a whisper. William let out a weak, hollow chuckle, shaking his head. I was about to ask you the same thing. Elon felt a strange weight in his chest, something between guilt and disbelief. He had not seen William in over 20 years, yet here he was, barely recognizable, reduced to a shell of the person he once knew. The man who had once been his closest friend now sat before him, bundled in layers of ragged clothing, his eyes dull and weary. William's weak chuckle faded into silence, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The distant sounds of the city filled the empty space between them, sirens wailing blocks away, the low hum of cars speeding past, the occasional murmur of a stranger walking by. Elon swallowed hard, his throat dry. How did this happen? William looked away, avoiding Elon's gaze. He rubbed his hands together, his fingers trembling slightly from the cold. It is a long story, he muttered. I have time, Elon said, his voice steady. William exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You would not understand. Elon crouched down in front of him, no longer caring about the stares from passing pedestrians. Try me. There was another long pause before William finally spoke. His voice was rough, tired. I had a life, you know. A good one. Got my degree. Started my own business. It was small, but it was mine. Then things went south. His jaw tightened. My dad got sick. I spent everything I had on his treatment. Didn't matter. He died anyway. His eyes flickered with pain. After that, things just unraveled. Debt piled up. I lost my apartment. The business collapsed. One thing after another, and suddenly I was here. He gestured vaguely to the streets around him. Funny how fast life can fall apart. Elon listened, absorbing every word. He had spent his entire life pushing forward, solving problems, building empires. He had never stopped to think about what happened to the people who had once walked beside him. You never tried to reach out? Elon asked, his voice softer now. William gave him a tired smirk. To you? The billionaire genius? What was I supposed to say? Hey, Elon, remember me? The guy who used to beat you at chess? Yeah, I am homeless now. Got a spare room? He shook his head. I have been invisible for so long, I forgot what it is like to be seen. Elon felt something tighten in his chest. This was not just about money or bad luck. This was about dignity. William had lost more than a home. He had lost himself. Elon sat there in silence, his mind trying to process everything William had just told him. He had spent his life chasing the next big thing, solving problems that no one else dared to tackle. But this was different. This was a problem he had never considered, one that no amount of innovation or engineering could fix with a single solution. William pulled the thin blanket tighter around himself, his fingers still trembling from the cold. Look, Elon, I appreciate the concern, he said, his voice quieter now. But I do not need your pity. Elon shook his head. This is not pity. He was firm, but his tone was softer than before. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I just cannot walk away from this. William gave him a tired smirk. And what exactly do you plan to do? Write me a check? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Throw some money at the problem and hope it goes away. Elon met his eyes, unflinching. No, he said simply. I want to help you, but not like that. William studied him for a long moment before looking away. You do not get it, he muttered. I have been out here for years. Do you know what that does to a person? You stop feeling like a part of the world. You watch people walk past you like you are nothing. You forget what it is like to have a conversation that is not about survival. His voice cracked slightly, but he quickly covered it up with a dry chuckle. And now, you, of all people, show up and want to fix everything overnight? Elon remained quiet for a beat, then said, I do not want to fix everything. I just want you to have a chance to fix it yourself. William let out a slow breath, his shoulders sagging. He looked down at his hands, rough and calloused from years on the streets. What are you suggesting? Elon hesitated for just a second before answering. Come with me, right now. Just get off this street, even if it is just for one night. William's lips pressed together. He wanted to resist, to argue, to make an excuse. But for the first time in years, someone was offering him something other than avoidance, and for the first time in years, he was tempted to take it. William hesitated, staring at the ground as if the answer were buried somewhere beneath the pavement. The cold night air wrapped around them, but he barely felt it anymore. It was not just the years on the streets that had hardened him. It was the slow erosion of self-worth, the gradual acceptance that this was his reality now. He had stopped entertaining the idea of change a long time ago. Elon did not move. He did not push, did not demand, just stood there waiting, his presence steady. It was strange seeing him like this, so real, so unguarded. William had spent years seeing Elon's face on magazine covers, hearing his name in conversations he was no longer a part of. And yet, here he was, standing in front of him, not as the billionaire tech mogul, but as the same kid who once helped him sneak into the school's computer lab after hours, the same kid who used to talk about changing the world. William exhaled sharply and finally nodded. All right, just for the night. His voice was barely above a whisper, but Elon caught it. Without hesitation, Elon reached out a hand. William eyed it for a moment before taking it, his fingers rough against Elon's smooth palm. It had been years since he had felt human contact that was not dismissive or unkind. They walked in silence toward Elon's car, an expensive yet understated Tesla parked at the curb. William hesitated before getting in, suddenly hyper-aware of his own smell, the dirt embedded in his clothes, the way the leather seats felt too clean for someone like him. Elon seemed to sense his hesitation. It is just a car, William, he said, sliding into the driver's seat. You are not going to break it. William forced out a small chuckle and climbed in. The warmth of the car's interior was almost overwhelming, his body struggling to adjust after years of cold nights. As Elon pulled away from the curb, William stared out the window, watching the city blur past. It had been a long time since he had seen it from this perspective. For the first time in years, he was not just another forgotten figure in the shadows. For the first time in years, someone had seen him. And for reasons he could not yet understand, he had let them. The silence in the car felt different now. Not uncomfortable, not awkward, just full. William sat back, his body stiff against the soft seat, his mind racing in a way it had not in years. He could feel the warmth from the heater settling into his bones, but it was almost too much, too real, too unfamiliar. Elon drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gearshift, his eyes scanning the road ahead. Every so often he glanced at William, not saying anything, just letting him exist in the moment without expectation. 20 minutes later, they pulled into the underground parking of an upscale apartment complex. William felt the weight of it all pressing down on him again. This was not his world. He should not be here. Elon parked and turned to him. You can stay as long as you need to, he said simply. William swallowed hard, his throat dry. And then what? Elon leaned back slightly, thinking. Then we figure it out. The elevator ride up was silent. William caught his own reflection in the mirrored walls, his sunken eyes, his unshaven face, his clothes that looked like they belonged to a different life entirely. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to turn around and walk back onto the street. Inside, the apartment was sleek but lived in. Not some cold, lifeless mansion, but a space that felt real. Elon tossed his keys onto the counter and pulled 2 bottles of water from the fridge. handing one to William. Tomorrow, Elon said, I want to take you to Tesla. William let out a short, breathy laugh. What? You want to put a homeless guy in charge of a rocket? Elon smirked. You are not just some guy, William. You were the smartest person I knew. You still are. The words hung in the air. No one had talked about him like that in years. He let them settle before he exhaled. All right, he said. One step at a time. Elon nodded. One step at a time. And just like that, the first brick of a long, broken bridge had been laid. Not everyone has an Elon Musk in their life, but sometimes, all it takes is someone noticing, someone stopping, someone caring. If you see someone struggling, do not look away. You never know whose life you might change.